All right, let's go ahead and get started. So thanks everyone for making time for this session. Today's webinar, the topic for today is optimizing your signal with Rollbar or in Rollbar. So we talk about signal and noise and how they affect your Rollbar experience, and managing the signal that you receive from Rollbar events, optimizing that for your team is very important. So we'll discuss different ways to do that. All right, so housekeeping items, just a quick review. This session is being recorded. For those unable to join live, you'll be able to view the recording for this webinar. Everyone is in listen-only mode by default, unable to unmute, but we do have a number of ways of handling questions. We have a chat system as well as Q&A. So the typical ways that you would ask questions on Zoom without unmuting. And we'll also have Q&A time at the end if there are specific questions. If you need to talk it out a little more, we can also address that at the end of the session. Okay, quick agenda overview. First, we'll talk about signal versus noise, what those terms mean inside of Rollbar, how they affect your users. Then we'll look at item grouping in Rollbar. So Rollbar item noise, where your screen can be cluttered by undergrouping, or you can perhaps miss out on signal because of overgrouping, what you can do to address that. Then we'll quickly review optimizing the signal inside your Rollbar events. That's sort of a side topic for number 2, where that very much plays into how those items are grouped and making sure that users get the signal they need from those items. Number 4, reducing alert fatigue with intelligent alerting. That may be what drew a number of folks to this call. When the term noise is mentioned with Rollbar, it can be a bit generic. Usually number 2 or number 4 are what folks are talking about. And then, of course, we'll have some Q&A time at the end. So signal versus noise, those terms as they apply to Rollbar. What is signal? Signal is the meaningful information that you're actually trying to uncover. Signal is going to help you move forward with the task you're trying to accomplish, with the problem you're trying to solve. It's going to be specific enough to direct you on that, and it unblocks you with that problem, so it helps move you forward. So then noise is going to be everything else, all of the irrelevant information you receive, all the things that come along with the signal that distract you from the signal, that make it harder to find the signal. And then in the world of alerting, I have repetitive and annoying mentioned there. Alert fatigue can be caused by things that maybe do deliver signal, but at the expense of someone's patience. You know, maybe you receive so many of these events that they cause problems for the other things you have to do. So you begin to ignore those. The alert fatigue caused, that is its own form of noise as well. So how do those problems manifest themselves in Rollbar? What noise problems do we hear about from customers? What things do people tell me as a customer engineer? These are just a few of the scenarios that folks have. These cover, I think, a lot of the basics, especially for newer Rollbar users and accounts. Maybe the items aren't grouped properly. Maybe you have tons of duplicates in your items menu. That makes it harder to find the real signal. You have to sift through a list of things that are distracting you from the actual data you need. So that's noise. Maybe your notifications aren't properly filtered. Maybe everyone in your development org is receiving alerts about things in lower environments. That would be something they potentially don't care about. So that causes alert fatigue in its own way. Maybe those stack traces are cluttered themselves. When you go to look at an item and you're trying to figure out what line of code is responsible for this, are you seeing a bunch of third-party code in there? Are there a bunch of dependencies making it hard for you to find your own source code within those traces? And then the proper filtering for notifications, or in this case, the lack of those notifications all being sent to a large channel, sort of tying in with our other notification noise problem. they're just going to too large of an audience, and people that don't concern themselves with these alerts are being pestered by them. So all of those would be considered noise in Rollbar, with us being considered by some to be an observability tool, delivering signal and reducing noise. That's definitely one of our primary objectives. So up first, grouping. What do we do about the noise incurred by the grouping engine? So let's briefly just review grouping. Unfortunately, we don't have time to cover this as its own topic. So what I'll say in short is that the grouping engine works to analyze these exception or error events that we receive and to group them by root cause. We're looking for the code culprit of a given event. And that's where we, of course, differentiate from logging, that the grouping of these items results in a cleaner experience. You can solve the code problem rather than being forced to sift through every event and find the patterns yourself. And with that grouping algorithm, some of the basics focus on file names and method names within the stack traces that you send to Rollbar. So that's sort of the core components of the grouping engine. So in some cases, the stack traces themselves may result in some undergrouping. Maybe it is those third-party dependencies. Maybe cleaning those up helps to resolve your grouping problems. But in a smaller, simplistic account, one of the fastest ways to fix simple duplication problems is just to merge those items. So merging is a UI tool. It allows you to just quickly select two different items in the list and collapse those. Just to save time switching between screens, I'll save this for my demo time at the end, and I'll show how to merge there. But merging is a quick way to coalesce items, and it may also suggest some custom fingerprinting to help you not have to do those merges in the future on your own. So that sort of ties in with the next grouping optimization topic that we have, which is custom fingerprinting. In any case where the Rollbar grouping engine is not performing satisfactorily, you can overwrite that behavior with custom fingerprinting logic. And these are conditional rules built in a JSON format. And basically all of the data that lives inside your Rollbar events, all of the key value pairs that you can see through the UI would be available for custom grouping purposes. I have an example that we'll show for this. I think it will do a good job of demonstrating both the utility of these as well as one of the problems that these custom fingerprinting rules can introduce. These themselves can cause overgrouping, can cause you to miss signal if these custom fingerprinting rules are created without regard for the downstream effects. Since they always overwrite the default grouping engine, it's possible for these to be too generic to capture too many events, thus resulting in signal being missed because it was overgrouped into an existing item. So just a few more tips here about how these custom fingerprints work. We'll look at the mechanics of that with our demo as well. All right, this comes up, I'm going to say far too often, but in reality, it's just a problem that we face. The source mapping of JavaScript code, other languages have their own symbolication. I think there's DSym for Apple iOS, and then I saw a new menu in our UI for Flutter symbols. But those languages that are transpiled or translated into another format, I know TypeScript, Node TypeScript does this, with minified code, with obfuscated code in whatever its form. It's not the original source code that was written by the developer. And so for us to display stack traces in minified code is very low value, to be frank. So adding your source maps to Rollbar is a critical part of that process. Ingesting events of minified code just tell you that something is happening, but they don't really give you a clear understanding of how or why. So make sure that if you are source mapping, if that is a part of the code that you have, if you have minified code there in your applications, we need those source maps to properly map those events back to the real source code that's human readable. And we recommend either doing that through your deployment process, make the curl command to send us those source maps, or we also have a Rollbar CLI that you can use as well. So as we're going along, if anybody does have questions they want to drop in the chat about relevant topics, please feel free to do so. We have Q&A time at the end, but if there are questions I can address about a topic as we go, I'm happy to do that as well. All right, so this is the last slide for the grouping optimization topic. We'll move along through the slides and then get to the real content. So when you send events to Rollbar, if they are not being rendered as stack traces, if they're showing up as plain text, even though they do have stack trace information, that indicates that there's something awry with the way you're sending us those events. There may be some casting of an object or something that we're not detecting properly. But if at any point an event comes in and is treated as a log, then it will not get the same type of advanced grouping that those stack trace exception types benefit from. So if you are having grouping issues on plain text messages, on those that do not contain stack traces, I don't want to say that's by design, but those logs are much more difficult to match. We don't put in the same advanced analysis that we're able to do on stack traces. So custom fingerprinting would be one of the ways to better handle those log events, because you can do regex matching in custom fingerprints. So I think that with regex being the authoritative way to match text, that's probably your best bet for those. Okay, so cleaning up traces, this section is pretty short. Some of the topics that are mentioned here kind of play into the grouping optimization as well. But I was just on a call with a customer and we were looking at some items, especially in JavaScript, the unknown script error message that we see. If you're doing JavaScript web apps, you've probably encountered that message. And most folks tend to agree that it's pretty low value. So with the third-party applications that exist out there for web apps, ingesting those events may just be a waste of your Rollbar budget. And so we do have a configuration for that, the host safe list and host block list configurations that allow you to control those events sent to Rollbar. So anything that's causing noise and coming from outside your domain, you can specify that host to be blocked. And that way you're not being forced to pay for those events. So manage the host safe list and or host block lists to better control what events you receive and from where they come. And then when we talk about noise inside your traces where third-party libraries are cluttering those stack traces, the server.root configuration, which is also used as a part of your source control integration setup, that field helps designate what is the home folder of your code. And so any frames in the trace that originate from outside that root folder, they'll automatically be collapsed and hidden when you go to view that item. So if you have maybe 2 to 3 frames of your own source code cluttered by 50 frames of third-party code, by setting the server root value, it will automatically hide those irrelevant frames. Your eyes will be drawn to just the relevant ones that were a part of your domain. And I have an example to show of this as well. So we'll take a look at that. All right, so I'll speed through the slides. I feel like I've spent too much time on them already, just so we can get to the action. So when we talk about alerting and the noise incurred there, the Rollbar alert system can be a bit noisy out of the box, just due to the fact that we don't filter out any events by default. We want to make sure that there's no missed signal, but with signal comes that high amount of noise as well. So the best way to control your experience there is through the filtering options that you have. And by combining the filters with the ability to send these messages to different channels, you can specialize your alerting practice and make sure that noise is cut down. The generic approach of sending all events to one large channel, it's just low probability that everyone's going to care about those events. And that leads to people ignoring those out of habit, which causes missed signal. So in that way, noise can actually cause real signal to be intentionally missed because folks are just getting too much noise that they don't care anymore. So a few more tips here on how you can better manage those messages as well. And then we have one new feature to introduce for our upper tier accounts. We now have the adaptive alerts notification trigger. And this is going to create a rolling threshold of your event rates. So the high occurrence rate rule as it exists today is set on a flat threshold. And that means there can be a lot of, there can be a lot of triggers of that when maybe it's just an increase, maybe usage is trending up and your alerts have not yet been updated. So now with adaptive alerts, that threshold will constantly change. It will be calculated in an auto-regressive fashion. It's sort of a rolling window that helps to bring down the number of false positives or noise positives, those that aren't really delivering much value because they're just repetitive. So this feature is designed to be low effort, low config. So when you go to look at that, you'll see that there's not much for you to do as a user in order to get the value from that. All right, that's a lot of talking. As I click through slides, I added a couple last minute, and I think it made my deck longer than I expected there. So let's talk about what this means in the real world. So just quickly looking at an example from my demo account, I guess I'll be a little bit all over the place as I step through this. So back to grouping, we'll start with grouping as the first topic, as we did. In this case, I was looking at a source map demo. I was actually testing my source map uploading process. And in some of these cases, I was able to tell that it did not work because here I just have a single character variable name there. Now, as you can imagine, I did not write all of my source code on a single line, and I did not use single character variable names. So it should be pretty clear why this event does not really offer me any benefit there. So properly source mapping those, instead of seeing these minified lines of code, that's when we'll actually see the real results that come back from them. So in that case, they're going to look a little bit more like our real traces where you see the written code there. So source map uploading, depending on what CI/CD tool you use, that may be the easiest way to do it. For most of my customers, I talk about the deploy tracking feature when I talk about source mapping, because that's the best place to upload those source maps is through your deployment process as soon as the new code is deployed. All right, so then talking about cleaning up what's going on inside your traces. This example is showing, this is a Rollbar internal event that we have here where the server root value has been set, and that helps to hide these irrelevant frames from the stack. So here, this one is a part of the app folder. So there we can follow this file path, and this makes sense. This was managed by someone at Rollbar, this code is proprietary. So we need to look at this and determine if the problem happened here. But then there's 14 non-project frames where things like the Google Cloud BigQuery package, I'm probably not going to change those. So they are not really a part of my concern at this time. They're still here. They still tell the story. But if I want to fix this, then I'm probably looking more at these lines of code. So that is accomplished. The way that we get those frames to auto collapse is because the server.root value has been set inside these events. And there you can see it's just set for app. So these frames all come from that app home folder. And the ones here all coming from the user local library there with these Python packages that are built in. So that's how you can better clean up what's happening inside the frames themselves. Okay, so next topic here, the custom fingerprinting abilities. We'll look at merging and then custom fingerprinting. So here I have two that look to be identical. It looks like these are duplicates. I use this example to show how grouping works because these actually come from different methods inside my trace there. So one comes from the create error method, one comes from say thank you. That's why these are considered different items. But you may say underneath that, they're both caused by the same missing method. So semantically, that's one reason to maybe group them. If I define the method, they would both be fixed. So I say that works for me. I want to merge those. As I merge them, it will suggest a custom fingerprinting rule for me here. So as a result of the merge, it analyzes both of the items in the group there, and it spits out this matching logic to say, this is what's in common for those. Do you want to just apply this rule going forward so you don't have to merge them on your own? In this case, I'm not going to do that. It's going to mess up my grouping if I do that. So here I can go and unmerge these. In this case, I'll do that just to clean up what I've got going on. So merges are not permanent. You can at any point unwind that. You can cherry pick a single item out of a larger group merge. If I merged all 4 of these, I could then pull one of them back out. But here, what I have for that merge, for these items here, so that is a part of what I did for my demo here, this can't find variable webinar. But I created a custom fingerprinting rule prior to the session, and I want to demonstrate one way that you can use custom data to group these outside of the default engine. So currently, this is the source code for my little basic web app. And I have key 1 and key 2 here defined as such, just ABC for one and 1, 2, 3 for the other. And foo is currently set to Baz. I'm going to change that to bar for this example. So in this custom fingerprinting rule, if foo is equal to bar, and if both key 1 and key 2 are present, if they're just not equal to a blank string, then I want to group this into a new item. And I want to format the title as such, custom error, and then inject the values from key 1 and key 2. So if I refresh my page after making the change there, I think I saved it in my editor, yep. So we should see these events come in. And despite the fact that before they were grouped as can't find variable webinar, I believe I should see this event or maybe a new version of that. Yep, there's 103. It just occurred a few seconds ago. There is this custom error. So now ABC 1, 2, 3. So of course I can change these values to anything I want. And as long as they're not blank, it's just going to find a combination of those. And that's going to be my new item title. And that's how my item will be grouped as such. So try to apply this to any of the use cases you have where maybe there's a specific exception type where you need to group on the custom data rather than the default grouping. That would probably qualify anything that has custom data in it that's more important than the default grouping behavior. But at the same time, anytime these all match, it will be grouped here. This overrides my default grouping engine. So that was why I added foo is equal to bar here. So that if I go back now and change this back to Baz, then those items will return to the original grouping process. So after that, we'll then see those start to come in back as the usual can't find variable webinar there. All right, so I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. That either means this is going well or it's not. So I think that covers most of the item grouping there. We talked a little bit about how to clean up those traces or to clean up the stack traces. Okay, so I just got a question. We'll answer this and then I'll do some alerting discussion there. So question in the Q&A, what about distributed tracing? How can I directly trace a log exception across servers or from front end to back end? So I think the best way to do that, I know what folks ask about a lot. You need to assign the trace ID and the span ID as a part of the Rollbar configs. So here, I think I've mimicked this before just by adding these to the initial configuration here. I'm not that familiar with tracing as a topic. I wish I had some experience with it, but I think you may be injecting those values during execution time where you call rollbar.configure once those values have been assigned. Because I don't think you know trace and span ID at setup time, but probably during runtime. So in this case, you could add those to a part of or here as part of the payload configs later in the process. And then there's a number of ways to benefit from the trace and span ID, not directly relevant to what we've got today, but definitely a good feature to know about. The service links that we have. You could inject the trace ID and the span ID into a service link that points over to Datadog or to another system that has more tracing info there. I think through that, and possibly with the help of telemetry, which sort of strings these occurrences together, this would give you another breadcrumb trail when we have a user session that results in more than one occurrence that will be shown in telemetry as well. So let's say there was an invocation pathway with with these microservices and it failed at multiple points. Hopefully that would be captured here as well. I think it would be. All right, so thanks for the question there. Let's pivot quickly to adaptive alerts and intelligent alerting. I think I might be over time. We'll just close out with this if there are no more questions. So alert fatigue is a big problem in Rollbar, people that get too many alerts. One of the things that maybe causes some of the fire hose effect that I mentioned earlier, we do have the channel or group setting up here at the top, but some folks don't realize that as you create new templates, new triggered exception or new triggered notification rules, or as you edit the existing ones, you can change the channel there. So this is the Slack notification settings that I use. It's pretty similar in other tools, but for each notification rule you create, you can designate a different channel. So at the most basic level, one thing that's very helpful to do is just to specify the different environments and have each of those going to their own appropriate channel. Because anything below the production environment does not need to go into a production alerting channel. And I'm sure if it does, folks will quickly complain about that. And we see that sometimes where folks would rather have no alerts at all than have noise alerts going into their prod channels. So you can fix that. You can change the routing of these. You can combine the filters here with the different channels that you choose to send to. The intelligent or the adaptive alerts feature, if that's enabled for your account, you'll see that at the top of the list here. And again, this is very low effort configuration. There's just a couple of fields for you to input here. You have to choose a minimum exception rate. So what's the bare minimum that I care about? And then the only other field that you're required to choose here is the sensitivity. And this is just low, medium, or high. Depending on what you select here, it will change the number of alerts you receive overall. So setting high sensitivity means you'll get more of those. Low, of course, means less. There's only one filter option for this, and that is environment. If you want to select just one of the environments to look at, that is the option here. But aside from that, adaptive alerts is going to calculate that error rate over time for you, and it will have its own threshold and choose to alert on that. Okay, last thing, just sort of talking about a combination effect of custom data and how that can be leveraged in your notifications. So back to my sample application here, it's a very basic web page, and what it's designed to mimic here is a donations page, just these two donations buttons for two different amounts. And so when I put myself in the eyes of this person, whoever manages this software, to me, a failed donation is a critical event because that means somebody tried to give me money and I didn't get the money. That's usually what keeps a business going, is the money. So I need to know when these failures happen. So in that case, I've actually done something that's a little atypical. Most folks don't care about every single occurrence because that's going to be a high number of events. That would be every single occurrence for a given item. So not just the one can't find variable webinar. Every single time this happens, I would continue to get a message about that. But what I've done here is I've filtered this down and qualified it to tell me about specific events. Only in the case where the team is equal to donations. So assuming I had other parts of my web app, maybe things like a news page, subscription features, we would have the team value set differently there. So only when the team is equal to donations am I going to send these events. And when that happens, I need to send a specially formatted message here where we attach the amount to the message, where a donation failed here, and I want to know exactly how much money was lost there. How much were we supposed to receive in that donation that failed? And so every single time this button is clicked, if the team is set to donations, which it is on this page, we'll see those failures come through in a Slack message. So just pulling that quickly onto screen here, that's what these events look like. So for some of the button clicking that I've been doing in today's session, I've received these events here. You can see the timestamp, all pretty recent from those. And here I formatted in a link back to that item so we can see that. So here is the item in question. But in that case, it's sort of a specialized purpose there where those donations, I am being notified about the failures there. And that helps me understand the impact of this event on my overall business. All right, so I think that covers everything that I had for the demo material. Hopefully that helped to illustrate the concepts that we have here. So that does bring us to our Q&A time. If anybody does have questions, feel free to add those to the chat. If you'd like to raise your hand and speak up about something, we can do that. All right, so I will continue to watch for questions, but I do have a couple of other things to make known here. We have more learning resources. There are other ways to learn this stuff. Bad news, if you don't like hearing my voice, there's a lot of that on the YouTube channel, but we also have written articles. We're trying to keep the documentation up to date as well as possible, and the knowledge base, the blogs, those help to illustrate the points. And then I see a question, do you have specific code examples to help reduce noise for items coming into Rollbar? So yes, the good news is that we do have those. Oops, clicked on the wrong link. But here in the documentation, depending on what language you're looking at, they usually have language specific instructions. So here you can actually just disable that, or if you want to ignore specific messages, there's another section here for the scrubbing, not directly relevant to noise, but very important. So these talk about different ways to manage the sending of those events. Be sure to check there if you want to see how you can control the event stream better. All right, and that is it for today's webinar. Thanks again, everyone, for attending. I hope this has been helpful for you, and we'll look forward to meeting again in the future.